The Sabbat is a faction that's completely at odds with itself. It's so full of contradiction that it's been difficult to run either as a pure antagonist or a playable faction for almost 30 years. Their identity has changed significantly several times across the editions of Vampire, as the writers have tried their best to reconcile the opposing poles that define the Sabbat. They're equal parts Catholic Church and psychopathic death cult. On the one hand, they're the ultimate cabal of the Illuminati, outplaying the Camarilla at their own game, while at the same time, they're out burning entire neighborhoods and breaking the Masquerade night by night in a deluge of blood and violence. These can't both be true at the same time. And despite having captured the imagination of vampire players all across the world with their brutal aesthetics and unrestrained violence, relying on vibes alone is not enough to play a meaningful game of Vampire the Masquerade. So are we saying you should toss the Sabbat out in the trash like you should with the Anarchs? No. There's a lot of great potential with the Sabbat, but you have to recognize this is a product of the 90s, and you shouldn't simply be a slave to nostalgia. If we're all being honest with ourselves, the Sabbat is kind of a mess, but there is a way to fix it. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of Vampire, and almost certainly you are, go check out our upcoming Kickstarter for the Bloodmore campaign setting. For those of you playing fantasy games, this is going to be a killer, gothic, and surreal setting for your next adventure game. Check the link on screen and below for more. Drown your players in a torrent of blood and mystery. So if the Sabbat is such a mess, how do you fix it? Well, the first step is really to understand the problem. The Sabbat were really never given their due from the very beginning. Their ethos and motivation was imagined almost entirely as just opposition to the Camarilla. It's something different than the default way of playing the game. The writers wanted to capture the more brutal and punk rock depictions of vampires that were popular in the 80s and 90s in movies like Near Dark or The Lost Boys. And don't get me wrong, these are good movies that we enjoy, but they really clash with the dark melancholy and the supernatural criminal underworld that dominates the game. The Camarilla is a dark and secret conspiracy of the Mafia and the Illuminati. So what are the Sabbat? They're out in the open, draining blood by the gallon and throwing Molotov cocktails at the local bar. The Camarilla is concerned with temporal power and disbelieves the ancients of vampire history. So what are the Sabbat? They're hyper-religious fanatics, obsessed with the end times and solely focused on the major metaplot threats of antediluvians. The Camarilla is strictly hierarchical. So what are the Sabbat? They're a terror network of fully autonomous cells that use super secret blood magic to escape any bonds of hierarchy imposed on them. Except they also do have a hierarchy, but not really. But they do. But they don't. Do you see where this is going? The primary foundation of the Sabbat in the game has always simply been as a foil to the Camarilla. They don't have a foundation of their own, and playing in a Sabbat game almost demands that you interact with the metaplot. A Camarilla game, on the other hand, can ignore the metaplot issues entirely because it has its own foundation that doesn't depend on it. You can ignore the pending apocalypse and your characters will still have coherent goals and personal horror galore. The Sabbat do not have this luxury. The metaplot entirely defines them, and this is a crutch to give you something to do other than running a B-movie slasher flick every session. The lore of playing dark superheroes wielding katanas and trench coats is 1,000 times more potent in a Sabbat game because your character is supposed to spit in the face of the Masquerade, and there's almost never any consequences. And for those of you who are yelling at the screen right now saying, "Oh, I played the Sabbat and breaking the Masquerade did have consequences. Blowing up that hospital in the name of the anti-pope made perfect sense. There was a ton of drama." Dude, you're fucking lying. If not to me, then to yourself. The Sabbat books made it clear that the sect pays some lip service to the Masquerade, but they're replete with references to how much fun it is for the Sabbat to break the Masquerade in Camarilla domains, as if this wouldn't immediately come back to bite them worldwide. It has never made any sense, and it's just bad world building. The oppositional nature of the Sabbat is a big weakness, but there is a more fundamental issue at play. The Sabbat is defined thematically and organizationally with contradictory ideas. On one hand, they're a dark reflection of the Catholic Church. This oozes atmosphere and horror, and it's legitimately interesting as an idea or as a faction. On the other hand, the Sabbat are a raving blood cult from the old times, with occult rites, blasphemous and alien philosophies, and a deep connection to the supernatural. Now, these are two great ideas, but they can't be mashed together into a coherent organization. The contradictions are too deep, and it simply ends up being nothing more than a discordant mess. And the proof of this is that when White Wolf and eventually Onyx Path were able to wipe the slate clean and reboot Vampire into a new world of darkness, these distinct ideas were broken apart and forged into separate factions, the Lancaet Sanctum and the Circle of the Crone. They were able to lean into the strengths of each and create competing factions out of the building blocks. And we're not telling you this is the solution to making the Sabbat better in Vampire the Masquerade. These are two different games with two different themes, and the Sabbat does have a role to play in this game. Where the Sabbat does shine as written is in their embrace of unapologetically being vampires. The Camarilla is ultimately a cope and a lie. They obsess over temporal power so that they can effectively hide and be parasites on the corpse of society for all time. While the Sabbat, however, know the truth. Vampires are not parasites. They're predators. And when it comes down to lore and metaplot of the game, the Sabbat are the only realists in the world. They know the antediluvians exist, and they aren't content to just sit around and wait for them to return at Gehenna. In this sense, they aren't LARPing. They aren't Cypher trying to return to the Matrix and pull the wool back over their eyes and go back to sleep. They refuse to wear the skin suit of what they used to be, and they recognize that the world is deeply mysterious. And it's this recognition of the deep supernatural elements of the world that's much more interesting than the explicit metaplot concerns. Imagine if the devil revealed himself to you explicitly. You're not reading the signs or attributing meaning to unusual synchronicities in your life. He's here, and he's telling you, I am real. Now, there's two ways you can deal with this situation. You can recoil in horror and spend every waking moment to distract yourself from the revelation and try to cling to a life that you know is a lie. Or you can confront that reality head on and dive into the deep end of the pool. The Sabbat have done the latter, and this is why they are so dangerous to the Camarilla. Instead of living in a way that's at odds with their nature, desperately trying to cling to their humanity as it slowly slips through their fingers, the Sabbat have cast off their humanity, and they've turned themselves towards a new and dark enlightenment.
We're not evil because of the evil we do, but we do evil because we are evil.
It's through their paths of enlightenment, these alternate systems of morality and philosophy, that the Sabbat is able to live more consistently with their predatory nature. This is the key to making the Sabbat work. It solves a lot of the ridiculous problems that have been written into the game's DNA. Being personally confronted with undeniable proof of the supernatural and the reality of the vampiric condition would absolutely blow apart your worldview. You'd have to reconsider every aspect of how you view reality. The Camarilla are fundamentally trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together by clinging to their humanity. It's a game that's doomed to lose from the outset. And this is in fact the point of the game. It's even fun to play, but the truth is that not everyone who is embraced would make that choice. Some would recognize the lie of humanity and walk a different path. The paths of enlightenment lead the Sabbat into an unlife that's very different from the rest of the kindred. Instead of playing against losing odds, they're forging a new path with their dark nature and moving towards a terrible transcendence. By following one of the paths, the vampire is able to look at the world with new eyes. The sterility of life as you knew it has been destroyed, and Earth can once again be full of enchantment and terrible magic. This is fundamentally a path of evil from any sort of human perspective, but the vampire is not human, and he knows this. Instead of clinging to a warped pseudo-Christian worldview, the Sabbat are those who strive on a sort of dark Nietzschean journey. The end state is not the Ubermensch, and it should differ from path to path, but there is a word in this game that is apropos here: Golconda. Far from the ludicrous path described where a vampire can walk in the daylight and suppress the beast, Golconda is the dark enlightenment of the kindred. It is to act totally in accordance with your monstrous nature and fully become what you are. It is in this striving for the integration of the beast that the Sabbat become a much more vitalistic sect. Unlike the Camarilla who cling to an outright and obvious lie, staving off the ennui, the Sabbat embraces their predatory tendencies and fearlessly explores the dark mysteries of the world and their own nature. The fact that blood magic in some form is ubiquitous among the Sabbat is a result of this commitment to their supernatural nature. It's not a return to something older, but a recognition that the new lies of the Camarilla are not and have never been the way forward. The paths of enlightenment have been around far longer than the Camarilla and are in fact a key part of the game in Vampire the Dark Ages. Like a Dark Ages game, a Sabbat game is far more introspective and existential in nature than the more structured game of politics and blood crime of the Camarilla. If you want to play the Sabbat, you have to recognize that you are no longer in the kiddie pool. And this isn't just about handling much darker content. In some way, it requires much more world building on the storyteller's part, and a much more committed and self-directing role on the player's part. But it's going to take a few changes to the default assumptions you have about the Sabbat. The first change is about their motive. You can't continue to look at them as primarily motivated to destroy the Camarilla for being patsies of the antediluvians. The metaplot is fundamentally broken, and it puts the Sabbat in a coffin they can't escape. This is not a personal motivation, it's a lore motivation. Yes, history is important, but every single person is going to have personal motivations, and members of the Sabbat are no different. Each Sabbat vampire has chosen to walk one of the paths of enlightenment. This is going to shape their actions and their motivations in ways that are very different from the Camarilla. Whereas the Camarilla might operate a business front to keep the money, blood, and secrecy flowing, the Sabbat will operate a front for very different purposes. You aren't playing the mob anymore. You're playing monsters who have tied themselves together through ritual blood magic in the service of a warped and debauched journey of self-discovery and self-mastery. This isn't Satrielli's from The Sopranos. This is the Marcos Dance Academy from Suspiria.
Is it true?
The 2018 remake of Suspiria is an incredible movie that provides the perfect archetype for a Sabbat pack and the front that they might hide behind. The Marcos Dance Academy is incredibly prestigious, and it lures young women into its ranks to train up to be the best dancers in the world. In a Camarilla game, this might be means of securing a herd of young victims or the vapid obsession of some aging toreador. But in the movie, something much more sinister is taking place. In Suspiria, the women who run the studio are secretly a coven of witches that prey upon young dancers, and they use them to execute their demonic rituals under the guise of art. They aren't simply preying on the blood of these young women or extorting them for tuition. They're cultivating, and they're feeding off of their anguish, using it to strengthen their magic towards a diabolical purpose. The air is suffused with suffering, and the girls have no idea that they are being tormented and used up. This is the perfect model for the Sabbat because it ditches the anarchic violence and devotion to leather trench coats and it replaces it with something far worse than that. Ripping the throat out of a bartender and burning the business to the ground, it's shocking, but it pales in comparison to the depths of evil going on every single day at Marcos Academy. This is something that can essentially be done out in the open and indefinitely. And the studio isn't simply a front for their crimes. Their victims are not only preyed upon, but they're deceived into participating in the evil of the cult without them even knowing about it. It's like a tiny portion of hell being made real in your city. And while the witches are indulging in their evil like the nomadic vampires in Near Dark, they're doing so in service of an actual goal, with real intention. This is not a crime of passion or the momentary eruption of the beast. It's a calculated torment that's directed at the goal of a dark transcendence. This is where the paths of enlightenment lead you. This is where blood magic and the Vauldery lead you. The violence is not done for the sake of the violence. It's done because it unlocks the power to transform you. It's done because doing so is your nature, and it's done because the Sabbat believe in it. It's their inhuman values being put into practice. These are not fanatical holy warriors presented in the books. These are the monsters who understand what it means to be a monster, and they live as that monster as fully as they can. There's no illusion or guilt, no lie. This is what it means to be a vampire. So can you see how this makes them a far more terrifying enemy to the Camarilla? Instead of armies of shovelheads, you have truly powerful and diabolic enemies that are out there, becoming weirder and stronger every night. The Camarilla is ossified and bound by the traditions. The Sabbat has no such restrictions because they have real convictions. They have beliefs that lead them, whereas the Camarilla only has their interests to protect. And since the Sabbat are dedicated to embracing their predatory nature and have no compunctions about the morality of diablerie, the Camarilla become nothing to them but prey. The Sabbat do not need to wage a holy war against the Camarilla. It's the Camarilla who needs to wage war against the Sabbat, or they'll fare no better than the mortal populace they feed on and the countless souls they've consumed. The Sabbat should be terrifying to the Camarilla, not because they're lunatic jihadist bikers, but because the Sabbat really are vampires, and they're not ashamed of it. With the Sabbat in play, the Camarilla don't need to fear the antediluvians. There's already monsters lurking in the darkness, looking to reclaim their blood and power. You don't need the apocalypse looming in the distance to make vampire great. You just need real vampires. Now, we've got a lot more to say about Vampire the Masquerade. The with clans and everything else that everyone out there is completely wrong about. So stay tuned and don't forget to sign up for the Bloodmore campaign setting on Kickstarter June 3rd.